We open our discussion with someone who has watched elections, midterm and general, from the highest levels of American politics. Bill Lacey served as President Ronald Reagan's political director in the White House and worked on several senatorial and presidential campaigns. Since 2004, Bill has been director of the Dole Institute of Politics on the KU campus in Lawrence. It is always a pleasure and a learning experience to visit with Bill Lacey. And Bill, welcome back to Ruckus. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you, Mike.
So Tuesday evening, were you thinking about the days gone by and kind of wishing you were back in Washington watching the returns come in the White House?
No, Mike. I was delighted to be sitting in my home in Olathe and watching on TV. It was a fun experience.
What do you think these elections said about the two parties in the United States, the Democrats and Republicans? Can we conclude Democrats are moving leftward and Republicans are moving to the right?
Well, I think you can conclude that, but I think the broader questions about each of the parties with Republicans is what do they do vis-a-vis their president? There's still a little bit of concern about his style, although I think most Republicans would score him pretty high on his substance. With the Democrats, the challenge they face, Mike, is, who are they going to nominate to run against President Trump? Are they going to nominate somebody from the left? And what is that going to do? Or are they going to nominate somebody more from the center, but who's an establishment person who's quite a bit older? So it's going to be fascinating to watch the next 2 years.
And apparently there will be no shortage of people running for the Democratic presidential nomination.
Not at all.
So, some people are saying as many as 20.
Yeah, I would be surprised if there's 20, but then again, I mean, we saw almost 20 running for
17,
Republican.
in 2016.
And I can see it with some of the individuals that they're talking about, like Beto O'Rourke from Texas and others.
Well, you knew Ronald Reagan pretty well, worked for him for a number of years, worked in the White House. How do you think he would feel about politics in the United States if he were around today?
I frankly think he'd be fairly disappointed and borderline disgusted. I think Ronald Reagan was a man of great civility and even though he was very conservative, he was of moderate tone and moderate demeanor. He reached out to the other side. As Jim Baker said at the Dole Institute yesterday, Reagan used to always tell him, and I heard Reagan say this too, if you can get me 80% of what I want, why wouldn't I take that instead of getting nothing? And that would be Reagan's attitude.
I remember reading quotes from him saying, I'm not going to go over the cliff with the flag flying when I can get 50, 60, 70% of what I want.
It's exactly what Jim Baker quoted him as saying yesterday.
We now are going to have divided government in Washington. The White House is Republican, the U.S. House will be Democratic, the Senate Republican. We've seen divided government many times before. You've seen it when you were in Washington.
Divided government has worked in two very specific instances in recent history. One is with Reagan passing bipartisan tax cuts and budget cuts, and one with President Clinton passing welfare reform, achieving a balanced budget. Those things were done with bipartisan support. So perhaps, although the environment was different back then in those situations, perhaps we'll see more of that.
What do you think about the Kansas election? I know you don't deal a lot in state politics, but we're going to have a Democrat governor in January, a Republican legislature. Do you think there's going to be peace and compromise, or are we going to see battles continue?
I think that's very hard for me to assess. I think that on the one hand, you've got a significant block of moderate Republicans and Democrats who will be able to work together. Whether or not they're going to be able to do as much as the new governor would like to do is hard to say. So I think a lot depends upon the new governor's willingness, Governor-elect Kelly's willingness to go across the aisle and try to reach out and try to be a fairly centrist governor.
I suspect she'll do that.
I suspect she will,
just based on what little I know about her, but what I've read. Let's talk about the Dole Institute.
Sure.
It's a fine institution. It's in Lawrence, Kansas, easy to get to. What will people see when they go?
Well, they'll see a wonderful museum dedicated to Bob Dole's life. They'll be able to visit our public programming. We do probably 2 or 3 programs a week during the school year. And coming up on November 28th, they can join us to hear experts sitting around a table discussing the Kansas results. So if they're interested, if folks are interested in finding out more, check our website. It's November 28th in Lawrence at the Dole
You don't need
Institute.
reservations to attend these
You do
events.
not need reservations.
And if you just go over to take a look at the Institute, there's no charge for
There
admission.
is no charge for that or any of our programs, always free and open.
All right, Bill, as always, it's a great pleasure to talk with you. Thanks so much for coming in. Come back and see us.
We'd like to do that, Mike.
All right,
Thank you.
sir. That is Bill Lacey, director of the Dole Institute in Lawrence. Now let's meet the panel and start a ruckus.